Welcome to Higher Intelligence, smart takes on AI for the next generation campus. I'm Bonilla, EdTech Executive, Data Scientist and Educator. Each week we cut through the noise and decode what really matters for your institution. That means AI explained for higher education. My friends, this week I have 3 stories, not unusual. 3 stories that belong together, not unusual, but probably one of my favorite topics in the whole world of higher education. Because I speak with an accent, people think I think with an accent. Because I speak with an accent, people know that I have personally, 20, 25 I-20s, F1s, the works. So today we're talking about the state of U.S. international enrollment, global enrollment as well. And we start with these interesting stats. U.S. international enrollment is in free fall. We're going to be talking about rates. We're going to talk about numbers that match our worst, scary numbers from the COVID era. At the same time, AI is rewriting how students worldwide search for schools. A stat that we'll be talking about. Only 17% of enrolled students use AI in their initial search decision. They came to you as an academic institution and only 17% actually use AI. How are they doing it? Is it traditional methods? Are there shifts in that? That's all self-reported data. But the disruption is just beginning. Underneath of all of this, we also will be talking about a story that shapes a mandatory regulatory White House sponsor vetting of AI models. And that should have an influence in how we use models today for international recruitment and many other things. So, of course, I need to bring the best there is to have this conversation. Today, I'm joined by Rishabh Malhotra, founder and CEO of Aido, building AI-powered intelligence for global recruitment. I think your creds, my creds, have some interesting stories, and I cannot tell you, I'm really excited about today's conversation. Why? Because Rishabh brings in the perfect intersection between these 3 stories. State of global enrollment, where AI is going in the aspect of regulation. Welcome to the show, Rishabh. How are you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm doing really well. And I would tell anybody that has an opportunity to join your podcast to do it because you just say such nice things that my Friday has just gotten better. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's basically what I do. I do education around AI and also data therapy for EdTech executives. So this is your therapeutic session, my friend. Besides being an EdTech executive, which I just mentioned, a bit of who the human is, and also this amazing company you're building. Let's start with those details so everyone knows where you're grounded. Who is Rishabh and what is Aido?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm most proud of in building Aido was it's a lived experience. So I lived on in the enrollment world at a college campus for 17 years, all the way up to associate vice president of graduate and international enrollment. And we were starting to solidify what that meant for undergrad and grad enrollment, so centralize those operations. So I did that for almost 20 years of my life, and then really wanted to create the solution that I thought we needed. And as I went into the edtech world, developing that this is sort of widespread. And the whole idea is, how do we build an intersection of who an institution is, their goals, this market intelligence where it's very desperate and disaggregated, and their own enrollment data. And if we can infuse those 3 things, we've just taken hours, weeks of time away from staff to then focus on students, but then to make better real-time decisions tactically every day, but then strategically so you can get ready for sort of what we're doing now, which is in a lull, it's a down period. And we think we're at the sort of beginning of what the normality of using technology in enrollment should be.
Through our journey in international recruitment, yours and I, by the way, it's interesting that you and I made our chops in international recruitment around the same era. And it was a little bit of the Wild Wild West. And I had so much fun exploring that world. Very, very privileged and blessed I saw the world. I think I worked more than 15,000 students. And really one of my badges, personal badges, treasure those years. I learned something, and I'd like you to react to this. What you're doing at Aido, it's solving certain problems, right? Are these problems of the subset of higher education, all of it? Are the R1, R100 schools, like, these tier 1 research top 100s, are they not struggling with this, as you start solving the problems, you know, what I saw is that there is these students have the perception of quality through very different lenses, and they go through those journeys informed by my neighbor, by my peer. The information asymmetry was a big issue, right? And one of the things that we did in the Wild Wild West is that, hello, I am not Harvard, MIT, or a top, 10 university. We're NYU, whatever the other schools that we're recruiting. And that was part of the game, to just basically raise our hands and say, this is who I am and what do I do academically? Is this kind of what you're solving, or that problem has already been solved?
No, we're definitely solving some of that because, I think a tool like Ado, I argue could be used by any university, and it solves a certain niche and a problem for them, especially when it comes to their data, right? Who has a good sort of handle on that is pretty rare. But what we're really solving for is how do you get better information to then position yourself in the right markets, given your historical trends and what your applications are, but really who you are and the value set that's important in that market or submarket. And if you can do that better, then you're positioning yourself outside of a brand name. Then you're personalizing who you are to that market and that institution, which I think a lot of what happens is like a spray and pray, or you spend a lot of money to hire somebody, a large organization or in-kind representation, which then takes months and years to develop if that would work or not. And we want to give you that power, that utilization, so you can make better decisions around that quicker. And so, yeah, we definitely want to help in having schools understand themselves in those markets a lot sooner than spending thousands of dollars and figuring it out later.
That's awesome. In your background, my friend, you also went through, you spent a lot of time recruiting. When was the last time you were in higher education, as in, doing recruitment and those type of things?
Yeah, so I left around 3 years ago. So it doesn't feel that long ago, but when you grind every day, the days feel different. But I would say at that time, we developed a larger team and we centralized graduate admissions, which is a feather in the cap that I'm really proud of as well. But the days that I could go and we would interview students for specific events, were also like that badge, right? And that was my real relation back to the student. But then, the higher you go, the more you are away from the students. But, you're impacting in different ways. But 3 years ago.
So you were in school, you were on campus while COVID did its crazy thing on international recruitment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, speaking of data, which one of a lot of problems that you solve on global international recruitment, speaking of COVID, the first story that I want to cover takes us back to COVID numbers, right? Because it looks really, really bad. And also it's important for everybody to understand that the data that I'm reflecting to, it's not recent. It's not last year's reporting. A lot of the clearinghouses that come from the different, state-supported groups for the U.S. have lagging indicators. What does that mean? They are fall 2025 data, and I'm looking forward to see what fall 2026 is going to look like. But Richard Rabb and some other data points, we're able to understand where this is going. So the story is that new student international recruitment fell 17% in fall 2025. That was last fall. That's total of new students. Total current fell 7%. That means international graduate declined 12%. So 17% new, 7 total, and graduate 12. This actually matches the largest single drop that we saw on record, which takes us back to COVID, right? The other side effect and the halo effect of this is that there's a financial toll that translates that, as we know, international recruitment brings in tuition revenue, the student rents a house and so forth, that it's an equivalent of $1.1 billion lost in revenue and 23,000 fewer jobs tied to international student activity. That's gigantic. I mean, Richard, it's a big number. The cost attributed to the changes in the fast-moving pace that the U.S. state has had on F-1 visas, J-1 visas that took effect last May, exactly a year today, right? Travel bans, we know about that, 19 countries, you cannot come here. 57% of the responding institutions, as it relates to new international recruitment, they saw this decline immediately, right? And most of it been attributed to visa processing challenges, right? I accepted you. You're welcome to come to my school, Rishab, but you couldn't get your visa as you were, I don't know, coming from Korea or Costa Rica or different places, or one of the banned countries, right? Basically, you couldn't process that. So that was a structural change that really changed the landscape. Before we go to you and what you think, at the same time, the competition is moving, right? Because we knew other countries are craving for this awesome talent that is coming from abroad. And institutions in Asia and Europe are actively recruiting the students who today would have gone to Harvard, would have gone to MITs, would have gone to these incredible schools that we support. And the assumption is that the US, as the default destination, probably the biggest brand there is outside as it relates to international student, it's on decline, in a real-time decline. So you are at the intersection of the data. You're an expert in international recruitment. You've done it. Is this a real crisis? Is this just basically a bad moment and there's regression to mean? What do you think of this as a crisis? Is it real or is it even hiding somewhere else?
Yeah, it's you can slice this in so many different ways, and I think it just feels different, I would say, right? So our work in enrollment and specifically international enrollment is very cyclical. You've got downturns, you've got up, your lows and highs, and it's definitely a lower point, but it just feels different. And you definitely saw a recovery post-COVID in like fall 2023. There was a massive jump back, right? And so you felt like it was a pent-up sort of, let's get back to the US, let's go what we've been doing and go to the brand. This feels different. I think, the other Anglo-spheric countries, right, the other big four in Canada, UK, Australia, that definitely took advantage of some of the rhetoric that was coming out in the administration in years past. And now it's everybody, right? They're not just picking up breadcrumbs. We've lost about 500,000 students that would have come to the US to other destinations. And when over 50% of students coming out of the Asia Pacific are now going to other countries, it feels different. It feels that there's a shift in, wow, I can go elsewhere and take advantage. Because it's not just I have more options. These countries are positioning themselves to take these students and give them opportunities that don't seem as plausible or it seems more restrictive to get in the United States. So if that carries over for the next few years, we'll see. But we know that the United States still has a brand recognition. We know that students are going to wait it out if they can, or they want to go to other destinations. So time will tell to see how much of this is reflective in long-term stature, but you still can't deny that the US has the capacity, right? These other countries have limits to space and institutions. And while they are incentivizing students and the government policies are becoming friendlier, we still have the huge capacity to take on these students, to endure this, to make sure that we can bring the students that want to come here, as long as our structures and our administrative policies are friendly enough. And I'll add this: there's always the perception versus a reality, right? So we can see a headline, especially these days, and one just came out 2 days ago, right? So the government just said they're removing the duration of status, which essentially means if a student was in the United States, they can take as long effectively to graduate, as long as they're in status and they're taking the appropriate amount of credits and they're in good earnings or good standings, they can stay. And now the government said it's got to be 4 years. And if you want to go after that, you've got to petition, you got to go through the process and pay money and biometrics. And while that's like, okay, they just have to go through the process, the signal in the market is, here's another thing they're going to restrict us. Here's another thing that is going to make us larger in the process. And I think the policy change is actually more impactful for the 60 to 30 days. So after you graduate, you had 60 days to sort of figure it out. Will I get that job? Will I get the OPT and the STEM extension? Yeah, and now it's 30 days. And so we talk about domestic students having a tough time finding internships and jobs after college, and now we're putting a timestamp. And I think that is probably more sort of restrictive, but that's a signal in the market, right? That says, hey, nothing changed, you just have to petition. Or now this is drastic from 60 to 30 days. So it feels different, and how this sort of impacts down the road, I think we will always come back cyclically to having what we were, but I'm not as confident to say that it's going to be at the same level, given what these countries are doing.
Two interesting points that you just mentioned, right? Let me unpack the idea of a signal. And we saw this a ton on graduate student recruitment, right? That the career aspiration of an international student coming to the US, it's for the career mobility and the signaling that the degree made in USA has, right? Of course, a lot of students came for the academic pursuit, research, PhD, all that, but the majority of the bulk, right? MS or any type of graduate degree gave you that union card. You can come and pursue a career in higher education. You actually penetrated the US labor markets. Signal, why should I do it now? Because now I only have 30 days to find a job. In the market, the signal in the market is that it's tough. So that's a compounding effect. The other part that I want to give you with signals, right, is you mentioned the cyclical nature of the recruitment market. You mentioned the long-term aspect of it. This is a long 12 to 18 months, right? There's a spring intake, but the bread and butter is fall. It's fall to fall, right? And at the same time, what we see is academic institutions going with the signals from last year and hoping that in 12 months, the world hasn't changed that much, so that they basically working on what worked and removing what didn't work. But that was 12 months ago. So with that context, let's talk about AI, because I think one of the problems that you solve is about the intelligence gap, and the recruitment cycles are long. The signals are terrible, and you just also say, as an expert, you expect recovery, but not as good as it was before. So start talking to me about the intelligence gap. Most enrollment offices are reaching out to students this term with last year's data. The AI is the best at creating patterns, are working with data, but is the data good? What is the aspect, the theory of where AI helps us or not? I guess my question would be, where does AI enter this conversation that we just had, and how does it help us solve problems?
Yeah. So I mean, hate to do a shameless plug, but I think where AI is coming in, I mean, this is a problem I would have loved to solve 6 years ago, but the technology just wasn't there. If you think of natural language processing and all that. So the timing helps. And so what we do is really normalize, conceptualize, synthesize, score, vet a lot of this intelligence and personalize it for institutions. So that's one thing. And I can go on for hours to talk about my baby. But I think another really important is, how do you get factual information or personalized information beyond sort of the first name of a student? And I think, some of the things that a lot of other ed tech vendors are doing is personalizing their behavior and making that very one-to-one. And so for universities that are able to do that is great. Then two, making sure that their content is, AI is eating up SEO, we can call it, but that's a place where students are going to, that gap is going to bridge, right, continually, of where they're getting sourced information. So if the content isn't ready and scraped for those models the right way, then that's going to impact university as well. And then if I go back to the personalization aspect, this is a huge opportunity, and one that we've got roadmapped and thinking through is this personalization impact with international students is so nuanced, right? And I think a lot of the tools don't think about this. And when you communicate with a student from Brazil, that's vastly different than communicating to somebody from China. And what we do is normalize that student, and it's gotten way better. And I think what you guys do and others is great, where we look at, okay, what were you interested in? What were the behaviors? How do we match your needs at that time? And when do we hand it off to a human? But in that process, when we're communicating to those students, we're actually not communicating in the best way, because we haven't built in their culture. We haven't built in their tones, the phraseology, the nuance of what makes them understand. Because even though they're regurgitating and getting this knowledge during this time where knowledge is everywhere and accessible, you have to be able to communicate through that. And if you can do that to build affinity, the way they respond, the way they talk, the way they gather your information, not just to them, but the buyers, the parents, to understand that who I am and what I'm talking about. So I think AI has a huge play in the next level of personalization globally. Of course, data, and then making sure that you're handing off the student at the right time, because there's different aspects in this process, which I think are different for domestic students, that the international app, it's such a large, high stakes decision that you can't AI that entire process, right?
So no doubt, AI enters the stage and makes its debut through personalization. One of the biggest, simplest, most powerful, low-hanging fruit, to use another word, right? As it relates to AI, is personalization at scale. Your point is personalization at scale as it relates to the international market is that it can bring the cultural layer at play at scale. So, to be honest, the Brazilian Chinese student example, that's too easy, too simple. I mean, you have an Indian background. I have a Latin background. There's something that bothers me, right? It's when someone passes me as a Mexican, because I am Mexican, right? I'm Costa Rican, and my rice and beans deserve its Costa Ricanness, right? They're still rice and beans, but between rice and beans Costa Rican, which is actually called gallo pinto, if you mix it and you serve it for breakfast, it's not the same way a Mexican rice and beans will come along. If you ping me at rice and beans in the morning, you got me, because I know this is probably the most authentic way to access. Is that kind of what you're talking about? That now I can introduce a la Costa Rican versus a la Mexican recruitment at scale?
Yes, 100%. So if we then take the Indian example, right? So I'm South Indian, right? And I love South Indian food, which is a lot of the idlis and dosas, and it's a lot of like non-veg or it's a lot of veg. I'm sorry.
Welcome to Higher Intelligence, where we talk about nutrition and food for higher education.
Exactly.
Anyway,
we'll spot to go to, if anything. But the point is, if you're telling me that you have things on campus that relate to Indian students, great. But if you go to a layer and say, I know you're South Indian, and we have things that have the type of food you like, that's the cultural layer that I think I'm talking about. And then also like infusing that type of language in there. That is a huge area, a huge gap that's in need, because what you've done is not just build affinity, but you've really got the heart of the student and done it in a way that's at scale. So I love food, so it's a great topic, but I think that's a great example. The same thing we're talking about.
But, all right, great. So now that by the way, at NYU, with the Indian population, you guys should play the dosa card in front of Washington Square, because it's fantastic. So you heard it from Rishab and Aido first. Anyway, personalization, I get it. What else it's AI doing? I mean, you keep on saying where the data is terrible, right? And personalization is one use case, one problem. But what else do you see AI helping us as it relates to this crisis? Yeah.
So I think there's a whole idea of how do you get one of the most scariest thing for a student is to go through the visa interview process, right? It's cumbersome, not just sitting down in front of a consular office, but like the documents, the money, all those things. And by the way, at that same time, these international students have to take their national exam on top of the SAT. Like it's a compounding amount that they have to go through, which is why I like to remove, hurdles in the process as many students, because we have to be sensitive to what they have to do over there. But I think there's a lot of impactful ways that we can help use AI to prepare students for that process. And you don't want it to get so automated and machine, because you don't want to be so prescribed getting to the student interview. But as much as you can prep students to understand, what does this mean? What type of questions do they ask? And, not have a script, but really just have your answers to T. So I think that's where AI can really help, because we used to have somebody in our offices in India really go through that process with them. And they were so good, but we couldn't scale that, right? And so now we do that in multiple cities, and then still give that human in the loop intervention to make sure that they're not just, getting an automated script and trying to memorize. But that's a huge thing. How do we get you 80% of the way there, and then use the 20% with some of our staff or sort of better communication skills? So, just recently, they're asking a question in the interview process is, are you scared to go back to your country? Like, that wasn't a question that they were asking a year or two ago, right? So you need somebody to understand that nuance or how that game has changed. Unless you're feeding the AI, whatever tool you have with updated information, you got to make sure you're up to that. And by the way, the answer to that question is, no, I'm not scared, right? Because if you say that won't be good in the interview. But again, we're not scripting students, but ultimately, I think there's a way to get students way more comfortable and then coach them for that 20%, which I think is really what we should be doing when you have such a high touch, high stakes decision with students.
Interesting. All right. So visa preparedness, right? Specifically in certain countries, it's traumatic. And I could see how AI, through its multimodal, multi-language, highly empathetic aspects that we'll experience in ChatGPTs or Clouds of the World, like you're the best, it gives you the confidence to come and have a more successful, authentic conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a conversation about self. And when you're an 18-year-old person or a young person, it's super, super difficult. I like that. Talk to me about multilingual. For the longest time, I also wanted to have the ability to express myself through 4 or 5 languages, but now that problem has been solved, right? What I'm talking about is accents, granularity of how this takes place, and multimodal. We spoke about an email, but what about voice? What about, like WhatsApp it dominates abroad the way it doesn't dominate here in the States. So talk to me about AI as relates to technology and multilingual and multimodal capabilities. And what are you seeing that helps us close the gap at this, enrollment numbers as it relates to the drop that I just reported?
Yeah. So I think it's a great transition and topic into if you're not using these sort of modalities that are specific to cultures and nations as well. So we talk about Line and WhatsApp and WeChat, all those. So one, if you're listening and you're not in any of these modalities, you need to be, because email doesn't cut it, and you need to be able to talk to them in sort of the modalities that they need. Now, there's ways to like infuse what you're talking about into those models for different languages and translations and voice that I think is the right way to do it. So I think you're hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. Like, how do I talk to a student who's using, Kakao Talk, in a language in a country, but then you're also translating, and then you're also speaking to them in the idioms. And large language models are really good with this, and the new releases are even better. So I think if you can get to the specification of how they communicate in country and tap that into a resource you're providing to the students, but then using voice and translation, et cetera. Yeah, I think they're going to start expecting that, right? Because other industries are doing it much faster than higher education, and you don't want to fall behind. So I think that's a perfect use case.
Interesting. The other story that we're tracking, it starts going into some of the data that is being captured through ChatGPT and how students are doing search. So let's talk about top of the funnel in search and some of the use cases that we just kind of seeded. So 80% of the students globally are using AI in their academic lives, right? The applications to the university search process, it's only using 17%. So there's a gap between the experience that I have as a consumer of anything, and apparently I could be using AI in multiple ways. Academically, I'm already using 86%. So I'm preparing for my finals or the interviews. It may be that it's offered by the school, or I just ChatGPT my way through it, or whatever conversational AI you use. But the gap, it's significant. Only 17% of the newly enrolled students have used AIs, whatever you used, Element, your tools, or something like that, to discover university. Web traffic from UK universities referred by ChatGPT rose 9x last year. This is where now language models and frontier labs may be competing with us, maybe competing with, I don't know, GRE search and name buys that you got. I find that to be very, very interesting. So start talking to me about how do I go upper funnel, and how do I start thinking about this is the right school for me? Because I'm going to leave you with this use case, Rishab, and I don't know you're doing it, but if I am a student today, and if I want to find this school XYZ, I'm prompting my profile, my preferences, asking the prompt to remember me, based on everything that you know, which school should I go to in New York, knowing that what I want is to be eating sushi every day, right? Legit prompt, something like that. And the recommendation could be you should apply to Pace University, Columbia University. And by the way, because you like sushi, you should consider San Francisco. And also like, poof, it changed my geo. How is the world of AI now powering search and program discoverability?
Yeah, so there's a level, I think it flattens a lot of the sort of discrimination students had to go to certain universities, right? So now you get more information in this era, and it's personalized, which means you're looking at stuff that you would never have looked at. Then you go to, are the students trusting this information? Because if there's a dissonance between using it as a practical consumer and now as a research tool to pick out colleges, that gap is going to close. You and I know that, right? But there is still a a trust factor. But what it's going to do is still act as a front door to your website. So if your website isn't personalized to that student, they're going to get the more factual information. So you just need to show up and at that search point at the prompt and answer. But if your website then isn't optimized for that international student, they will go to the one that looks like that is. So there's a dissonance that has to get, closed off from showing up at LLM searches. And then your website has to be optimized for that international student experience, because that is still the number one place they're going to go and get information that they trust.
But those are two things, right, Rishabh? You're saying your content through the website, because that's what agents are consuming, needs to be optimized so that it's agent LLM ready, right? But also within that optimization needs to speak global international realities, right? So it's you're talking about two, I don't know if they're different things, but two distinct. I have to put in my agent friendly hat, and I have to put my international hat to develop content, right?
Yes. I think there's I think there's in the Venn diagram, the middle is very large, I think, for these two distinct problems, right? Because if you're solving one, you can solve the other. But yes, there's a little UX or user experience that you have to think about compared to the agent.
Are there any things on top of mind that you would recommend a school to be thinking about to show up favorably on those conversations? Is it that I need to create MD files so that an element grabs it? I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah, so there's a technical aspect of like how you're fitting the type that is best consumed by the LM model. So MD, markdowns, MD files and stuff like that. I also tell people to make sure you're checking on like Reddit and all those other type of third-party websites and see how you're being consumed by students.
I love that very much. By the way, you can use AI to do that itself.
100%. So go to these like social websites, that are out there and see if your school is being talked about. And then what are those topics? And then formulate your content around that, because that's where these LLMs are grabbing stuff anyway, right? By and large, they're going to some of these third-party community sort of user group community websites. So take that and start putting it on so your website gets sourced onto that. But then you have the reliable topics that are talked about. Now, part of this is having a large N, right? So like some of the larger schools will probably talked about more, et cetera. But you don't know what you don't know. And you got to go out there and research and figure it out, and then talk to students and start prescribing to that. It's very anecdotal. So we hired, we have a student on CPT, OPT STEM extension. He's a data science student, right? And he's Indian, went to the school. And I just talked to him. I said, listen, what are you telling friends, or what are your friends doing that are applying right now? And it's anecdotal, right? But he said, listen, they're all using ChatGPT and they're looking at getting information, but there is still a very much a trust factor. This is still a high stakes process. So what they do is get information. They will verify everything on your website. They will talk to their friends. Like, this gap that exists with AI is not removing this community-based organism that these students travel through. So you have to make sure that you do some of the prescriptive things that we talk about, which is having great communications, going to the channels that they're talking about, and then getting optimized with what they're talking about in these community-based sort of websites. But it's like they're going to start there, but they're not removing you from the process. You just got to be better in the process.
We were used to understanding that the content that I put on my website is the official documentation, the official source of truth, the authoritative source of who I am. Your point is that the perception of who you are as an academic institution, the brand that you have, the perceived value that XYZ student is going to get will be informed by that, and Reddit and other, rabbit holes of content where students spend time. And an LLM may actually favor these peer-to-peer voices as opposed to the official one from the school, or at least it will maybe put them on the same indexing, right? So it's a really interesting problem. Not problem, I would say opportunity, because right now, to my earlier point, there should be no barriers for you academic institutions and leaders to go out and find out what are people saying on LinkedIn, Reddit, and whatever other things about you, your programs, and even bring it full circle to your point of personalization at scale. Going back to how AI is helping us fix these interesting problems on personalization on a global scale and just overall recruitment. If I look at all the funnel, right? So, and maybe I'm being too discreet. I see personalization on a scale helping throughout the funnel, but specifically upper funnel. Like, how do you get these properties? How do you get the application generation aspect, right? So you get the application, and then the example of visa prep, super lower funnel, yield management, admissibility type of issues, and kind of getting the student to deposit or confirm. Are you seeing AI being better in certain parts of the funnel? Is it throughout the funnel? Is there something more that, I wish I could be doing? And it's kind of like, the prospect to applicant phase. Where do you see AI making this most difference right now as it relates to the admissions funnel?
Yeah, so I do think the top of the funnel is the easiest, as we talked about, right? Some low-hanging fruit. But I think once the application has been made and they're going through the process, right? So you think about it in two sort of verticals. One, I think there's a whole like credit evaluation process, right? So if you haven't, as a university, looked at tools that can make this faster to evaluate transcripts, evaluations, and then it be culturally sensitive, and there's great tools out there that can do that.
That's operations, yes.
The operation side of it's huge because one, it's nobody's got the cognitive, wherewithal to stay that. And plus, I always tell this to my staff, right? Like customer service is so important in general, but international students, this is a high stakes decision, right? So this could be the 100th time they email you, or you get an email 100th time, but that's the first time they're emailing you. And I think the cognitive load on a staff to make sure that the 100th email and reply is as exciting and exuberant as the first is something AI is very good at. So you want to be able to take that operational load off of staffs with credit evaluations and then answering questions that, used to be student workers or it used to be staff that can do more high touch yield, high touch engagement. And then when you mix that into sort of the hours that we are not awake, then the customer service goes up. So I think the middle of the funnel is really getting them through the process and then relieving your staff to then do the high touch things that are very important with Melt and stuff. Because Melt doesn't start in the summer. Melt starts 6 months before then, which is that engagement that you're not doing because you're busy answering emails. So that is incredibly useful, I think, for a university to consider.
I'm glad you're bringing this up, right? Because it's not only the aspect of recruitment in the school to student layer, it's AI powered. It should be all AI powered. And you're working on those problems. But the service delivery of an admission, deposit, it's a business operation that we have in schools, and processing that application, is where AI and ops do fantastic. So admissions operations, the emotional weight of relocating internationally, it's a big one. Arrival logistics and course registration from abroad. Oh my gosh, just incredible nuances. Are you working on those kind of office service delivery as well, specifically?
No, so we don't do any of the operational and or student engagement activities. We purely do the intelligence. So I was listening to one of your other earlier podcasts, and we really believe in depth to dashboards. Like we effectively think there's too many of them and they're hard to consume and they actually don't. So we're solving that, right? We want to solve that at scale. And we're actually, we're pivoting to domestic as well, because we hear from all of our university clients. So we are very much on let's interpret your data. Let's interpret this market intelligence, this external together. So we really want to focus on that and then develop that operating system that allows universities to access their data in the best way possible to make decisions to do all that. Yep.
Let's go back to policy and kind of how we started the episode, right? Thinking about the sector and where it's at. So as of May 2026, the Trump administration is pivoting on AI policy, and it's a pivot on oversight. The White House is interested, right, because it has not been written into law, to come and have basically an execution power and a review process, if you will, for frontier AI models. So this means models like, come from Google, Anthropic, Microsoft, OpenAI, XAIs will require some type of federal vetting before deployment, specifically focusing on national security and cybersecurity. Why? Because we've been seeing over the past 6 months that there is some type of threat in the landscape as it relates to security. So the punchline here is, in what I see for campus, and I'd like you to react as you are a consumer of AI and a producer of AI for academic institutions. This is what I see, right? The regulatory AI environment is not static. This is very common, right? And it's developing, right? And it's basically happening at a pace that is very different to the pace of development. So what we will be seeing, and we have been seeing, is that AI technical drops way, way, way faster than the regulatory environment. So we're always playing catch up. The vetting process in Washington, needs to come and address these things that are happening, some fears, some speculation, some real things. But for edtech companies like yourselves, right, for academic institutions, these government frameworks and policy changes the data architecture investments that we have had. Maybe, maybe not. It will create disruption. So as a edtech expert and leader, how does this make you feel? Also, as an advisor to academic institutions, could be your clients, or as an expert, what do you say this could be an impact of? Like, what do you make of this story?
Yeah, and just to connect it to like the global landscape, this is why you had like European countries being way more aggressive earlier on with regulation because they knew they couldn't keep up. And so just a tangential comment there. No, this was always coming down the pipeline, right? Like it makes sense, and I think there's ways to do it. And I think it's better at the federal level than it is by the state. I think that helps, for having an even equal playing field for companies like ours and what we want to do, and for consumers. There's a certain level of, I welcome this. And why? Because I think if you're building a net tech product, if you're building an AI product, it's really quickly to get a bug. It's very quickly to take the next model and build something, but that's not where the work is. And so for me, it's like a filtering process, right? If I'm not providing value for my clients in the workflow with the current model, I shouldn't be worried about the next one that's going to build the next whistle or tool that I need. So for me, it's a filtering process. And what I care about more is what exists now, and am I creating value? And if I can create value with what I have, and when we iterate and get better, because in this age, it's playground and kill and iterate and build as fast as possible, I'm not worried about what will come if I'm servicing my clients now. It's a different issue if the language models go away altogether. But if there's a new frontier model coming that makes things more intelligent and faster, and it takes a while, I at least know that I've worked with my clients, and you have worked with your clients to build the workflow solution instead of selling them a feature that they don't need or want. So in that venue, I welcome sort of what they're going to do appropriately. So there's sort of a larger mass of people adopting at a pace they feel comfortable with. But I think universities, really need to understand that you can't depend on that regulation, and you have to figure out what this means for you. And part of that is not full-on risk, but it is experimenting in a very controlled way. And there's a lot of tools that are trying to do it the right way. So you working on your governance is important, but you can't work on the governance so long that you're now 3 years behind on something, and you have to work on new governance for the new thing that has to happen. It is like you have to do things in tandem. And so, yes, I'm biased and I'm selling a product, but I worked somewhere for 17 years where when somebody asked me, what did I do before Ado? I said, I served time. I served time at a college campus, because I would implore anybody to say, work on your governance while implementing something, and find a partner you could do it together with, because you will never get it right. And unless you're figuring this out in real time, you're just theoretically prioritizing something that doesn't exist. This is the perfect time to do it.
I think what you said is on the money. First of all, global markets that, where students are also considering to come to school, right? They're probably more progressive as it relates to policy and governance, and they are ahead of the curve. So we're playing catch up here domestically. I like to say that our technology is farther ahead here. So we have the reverse. So we'll see how they balance. One more question here, kind of off script, but I get a lot of questions from our partners in academic institutions. What are we learning from, mining thousands of interactions of students, specifically Gen Zers, as it relates to agents and chatbots? And, we say 2 or 3 things, right? Are you learning something from the international population? Are they more agent forward? They don't like the authentic aspect of AI. They want the AI to be forward and disclose. Is there a signature of the international student voice as it relates to AI that you're seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a little bit of a dichotomy, right? Like we tend to think younger generations to be like forefront of technology and usage, but you're actually seeing a little bit of that pushback to say we're seeing a little too much AI, right? Like you're relying on it too much, institution. Or I think there's a little bit in Gen Z, in this creator influencer life, right? I think people recognize their self and brand more drastically. Whereas I think as a millennial, we didn't think about that way. So now they see like the output of them as very valuable. And so I think they have this weird interaction with, I love the efficiency, but don't use it too much, X entity. And I don't want to use it too much because this is what the output I'm producing is my brand. And I don't want that watered down. Thus, I don't want you to water down your brand if I'm trying to authentically communicate with an entity, organization, et cetera. But it's such a dichotomy because they're still using it for everyday life. So it's really, really interesting when you like read about it and read interviews is they want to give a report and they want it to be theirs because now that's an artifact that belongs to them. It's not an artifact that lives in Claude, right? So that's been my experience.
Last question, kind of anywhere you want to go, anything that we're missing as it relates to global enrollment, AI, the intersection of the two, do you think is important for everyone to listen to?
I would give a PSA, right? So if I could talk to,
all right.
Yes, this is my thing. Budgets are tight, and I get it. And we can't go recruit international students, but if you want to recruit international students, they were never a plan B because the demographic cliff was coming. So remember when the demographic cliff talking about it, they're like, well, international students are the thing. But you're not a bazooka gum or a Tic Tac in the grocery aisle, right? So
wow.
if you want to be in international recruitment, you have to be of international recruitment. And if you were going to do this, but now there's no revenue coming in because I don't want to invest money because there's no ROI, it was never a 1-year experiment. This has to be a multi-year investment and commitment to the student and this experience in the journey. So as you look at revenue not coming in and you talk about indicators and lagging indicators, there are going to be a lot of universities that, yes, aren't experiencing the same numbers, headcounts and revenue and net tuition revenue. But what this time gives you is look in the mirror, look at your operations, look at your infrastructure, and what can you change now so you will be ready. And the universities that prepare themselves, they plant the seeds, look at their operation, their communications, what tools, how do we grow during this time? And invest in that way, we'll see the grounds when this does get better because it is cyclical. It is a challenging thing. I don't envy the presidents and finance people that have to do this and the boards that are looking at the revenue and the profits and losses. But I think it takes a courageous leader, and that's what we need in this time. Innovative leaders to say, we need to invest and let's get our stuff better. So then we're not having the questions, what can we do now to get students? You're already doing it and you've built the affinity for when the mobility grows back to the United States. So that's my PSA. And I would say there's a way to look at it. And we're happy to have that conversation at 8.0 and discuss those needs. But in general, there's a lot you can do without spending a ton of money.
If you want to do international recruitment, you have to be of international recruitment. Very powerful statement, and I couldn't agree more. Rishabh, thank you so much. You are operating in a very peculiar, lovely intersection that I don't think a lot of humans have a clear view. Data, AI, institutional side, policy, all wrapped around international enrollment at once. Rare vantage point, and everything that you said today, super worth hearing. So really, really thank you for that. And for those of you listening, four things actually to mention. Check out Rishabh and Aido, great company, solving problems on global recruitment using AI. Number 2, $1.1 billion estimated dropped in international recruitment seen last year. It's a lagging indicator, but the pipeline heading to fall 2026 is the number that everybody should be looking at, and the attention should be focusing on that now. 3, AI-mediated discovery is already happening, and tools out there, AI is solving that problem. We saw that 9x growth in ChatGPT referrals from universities into the UK happened in only 1 year. The institutions who figure this out will show up in the conversations with international students, where it matters, how it matters, a compounding advantage. And last one, the regulatory environment is changing. That is not a reason to pause, as Rishabh just said, and I'm telling you, it's a reason to build smarter and faster. I'm JC Bonilla, this is Higher Intelligence, and see you next week. Thanks for listening to Higher Intelligence. This show is part of the Enrollify network, home to the largest collection of podcasts in higher education. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. You can find more podcasts, webinars, videos, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe to get new content sent directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the AI agent platform for higher education. Learn more at element451.com.